Hello and welcome back. You're listening to the Everglade Chronicles, a reading. I'm Garrett Shave, the author. Today I'll be reading Chapter 3, Sunday Tea with the Queen. Get the kettle off the stove and fill your teacups. Let's get started. The Duke of Sunset's throne was an old wicker chair, older than the Queen's. It had been here longer than I and was gnarled and partly broken. The arms had been weathered by constant rubbing from an endless line of dukes from times before. Nonetheless, Hudson sat gingerly on it, his frame too small for his feet to touch the soft earth of the Duke's solarium amongst a small grove of trees. All mid-afternoon the citizens of Sunset Town, as well as those who lived on the outskirts, were swearing new oaths of fealty. I stood somberly, watching helplessly as these small tots were forced to kneel and swear to obey the commands of our bratty new lord. However, it needed to be done. Whenever a new person came into a position of elite power, new oaths had to be sworn to assure loyalty. The children of Sunset were more than obliged to obey Hudson, but a few were skeptical about how he was going to do things. He was so unlike his brother William in 101 ways. "Madison is our last citizen, Your Grace," Benjamin told him. "Excellent. I am getting tired of hearing 'Yes, Your Grace,'" he replied with a yawn. "Do you have any plans for the afternoon, sire?" I asked quietly. "Hardly," he said, hopping off the throne. Madison had come and gone with utter silence. She was one of the few who were worried about his regime. "The Queen has her delegation tomorrow. That I shall attend. Otherwise I might wander the royal city and see what I can find." Benjamin was alarmed. "But Your Grace, your duties must keep you in Sunset Town." Hudson laughed. "I am the Duke now. I do as I please. Who says I must remain in Sunset? Just because my petty brother spent all his time here doesn't mean I have to." "Should it please you that I attend your trip to the capital?" I asked remotely. He waved his hand dismissively, and I was relieved. "No, you shall remain here. I will take a few guards with me, and that will be all." He looked over at Benjamin. "I am also thinking about calling for elections. I should like Her Majesty to know that I am optimistic." Ben's face went blank, and the Duke walked off. I stared at him vacantly. Ben had been mayor for quite some time and was the most respected out of all of Sunset's people. "This season isn't going to be fun," I sighed. I spent the greater part of the afternoon walking around with Benjamin, grasping the landscape of the duchy now that it was in full swing. If the Duke wasn't going to take an active role in leading his people, we would. The farming children were expecting a bumper crop, something that would help us out in the long run. I doubted that Hudson knew anything about agriculture. "Don't let this election startle you," I said to Ben. He was still green with illness at the idea of losing his position. "You'll be re-elected unanimously." "I just don't know what to expect," he said. When we rounded a corner near the path that led to the city, Sassy Cassie was standing there. She had her arms crossed and was looking unnerved. Cassidy had roots in Sunset Town, and I knew secretly she held resentment for the new Duke. "May we help you, Cassidy?" I asked. "Just something to report," she said with a heavy sigh. "I'm afraid you won't like it." "Go on, please tell," Benjamin encouraged her. Cassidy nodded. "It would seem Lord Ashton's class is studying the French Revolution this year in social studies, which has triggered him to think of divinity in the form of kings," she explained. I nodded intently. I had researched a few aspects of the ancient regime of the French kings, and they held belief that their king was a ruling god unopposed by none. "He is informing Queen Venus of this and telling her that she could become a godly queen if she welcomed new laws. Such laws would skyrocket the aristocracy as well, to the point where their collective power is beyond absolute." "But the French Revolution did not end well," I explained. "The people did not like the idea of an absolute ruler and disdained the luxury associated with Versailles. Has Ashton forgot to research the part about the guillotine?" "I am sure with a few quick tweaks to the system, a dangerous revolution could be avoided," Cassidy continued. "In any case, she is thinking about revamping the royal system to where aristocrats have more say in their government. This is where things get worse." "There is much worse than the divine right of kings?" Benjamin asked, shocked. "Duke Hudson himself nominated the idea that the position of elected officials be abolished. He thinks mayors and other representatives should be appointed. This would lend more influence to the ruling class and take away influence from the working class," Sassy Cassie explained. My eyes flew open and my jaw dropped. I could tell Benjamin was looking the same. Cassidy only nodded. Her words were like razors. If elections were taken away, the people wouldn't have a say in government. The elite could appoint who they desired, including those who would do a poor job. I think it would be best if I joined Lord Hudson at his tea time with Queen Venus tomorrow, I said nervously. That is a good idea, Cassidy said. You are his royal attendant, after all. I doubt he would let Benjamin go. The new Duke wants to get rid of him. When did all of this happen? Ben asked, his voice shaking. Cassidy winked. One of my agents is a royal guard, but I cannot tell you who. They just told me this no more than half an hour ago. I think it will be the hot topic tomorrow. Was there any more talk of the Lost Forest and the new Duke there? I asked. Hardly, Sassy Cassie replied. Much of the talk seemed to be absorbed by this new government system. I think the Queen likes the idea of being a goddess. It was late afternoon when I noticed the soldiers carrying new weapons. Lord Schuyler had patrols sent around every so often to ensure peace was being kept in the kingdom. When one came into view of Sunset, I couldn't help but notice the foam swords they held at their waists. Ben noticed it too. So we've upgraded from wooden spears to foam swords, I said, crossing my arms. I wonder who is responsible for that, Benjamin asked. To bring in such a controversial weapon would surely spark some sort of conflict, but if it was the Queen, she was only securing her future. My guess is that it was Lord Schuyler's idea, I said. While they are made of only foam, swords are a powerful medieval weapon. When the patrols passed, I heard a rustle on the bushes outside of town. I figured it was Cassidy, returning with some news. Her chosen hideout was a bush. Before she started her spy agency, Cassidy was a member of Sunset Town and worked alongside us. I'll be back in a moment, I remarked. I'm going into the city to see my sister. I walked cautiously towards the rustling and stared intently. Someone peeped out, a set of jade eyes. Show yourself, I demanded, in the name of His Grace, the Duke of Sunset. The spy stepped out of the bushes and smirked sideways. It was only Catherine Somerset, one of Cassidy's cohorts. Cat, as she preferred to be called, was in grade 8 and was Irish. She had a twin, Cale, who was also a spy. Cat and her family had moved from Ireland no more than 2 years ago, so her accent was still very strong. Why are you in the bushes, Cat? I asked, folding my arms crossly. Cat was shy, and she stared at the ground. Her orange hair was messed and full of leaves. Doing the work of my leader, Your Grace, she said, stammering. I found pity, for I supported Cassidy's spy agency. That's quite all right, Catherine. It is incorrect to address me as Your Grace, so please refrain from that. Cat nodded and looked up at me. Miss Sassy Cassie is worried about the foam swords, Lady Jessica. This throws a wrench in her plans. What does Cassidy have planned? I asked. I cannot tell, Cat replied quickly. Best be going, then, I said sharply. I cannot have you hanging about, Cat. If Hudson were to find you, he would surely have something to say. Catherine Somerset nodded bleakly and hopped back into the bushes. When I peered into her small hiding spot, the Irish girl was gone. Sunset Town lived up to its prowess when the sun began to fade in the sky. The orange and yellow pierced the meadow, casting a glow upon the land. The lanterns in the capital were lit up as I strolled along the paved promenade. There were more guards than ever in the capital, something that I found unsettling. I walked carefully towards the ministry where my sister was working. Perhaps she would know why there were even more guards than last season, and why they were carrying foam swords. Well, if it isn't Miss Jessica Walker, I heard a voice chime. I turned sharply, and with a sudden queasiness, noticed Lord Ashton walking towards me. He branded his cane around with an eccentric manner and smiled brightly. Surrounding him was an entourage of about 10 children. Most were minuscule servants. A few of the taller kids in the back carried Halloween axes as their preferred weapon. I bowed deeply. Your Grace, the pleasure is all mine. I hear your sister is now a general? Isn't that rather exciting? The military is getting a sure boost this season, so I have heard tale. Yes, I have heard about the foam swords. Is there anything else I should make my liege, His Grace, aware of? I asked. Lord Ashton laughed, handing his cane to a smaller child. His hand gestures were very expressive. Not at all, my dear lady. Your Duke Hudson was at the forefront of the delegation this afternoon. There will be quite a few changes arising in the coming days. It is good to know that the new Duke is active and optimistic, I replied quietly. Ashton's happy demeanor turned cold suddenly, and he began to whisper. "You're all in for it, the lot of you. Don't expect Sunset Town to be as it was, my dear little missy. The Queen has big plans for the meadow, so things will be changing around here." "Your Grace," I replied passively, backing away slowly. Ashton opened his hand, and the child brought back his cane. "Just a fair warning to you and your people, Mistress Walker. Good evening to you." With that, Lord Ashton and his retinue began a steady walk towards the birch trail. I watched them stroll for a moment, but turned away towards the Ministry. The Ministry was the formal name for a large metal jungle gym. The bars were colored red, green, blue, and black. While some children were swinging from the bars, I could see my sister consulting with the other military council, Ryan amongst them. Inside the gym was an open area, where the military often debated and planned. "Abby," I said smoothly. She glimpsed me through the metal bars and smiled, slipping between the narrow entrance and meeting me on the pavement. "Jessica," she said, surprised, "what brings you to the capital?" "There is calamity across the meadow," I said in a whisper. "I have some information, but its source I cannot reveal." Abby smirked. "The spies are at it again, are they? We have our intel." I blinked. "That is not why I have come." I inhaled sharply. "I'm curious to know why there are so many guards around the meadow this season, and why they are carrying foam swords." My younger sister folded her arms. "Well, since you're gentry, I suppose I have to tell you. The Queen is upping security around the meadow. She feels she is at risk. The uprising rumors in the forest has her worried. As for the foam swords, it is simply progress. Think of it as a renaissance of sorts." She beamed. I nodded and thought for a moment. The aristocracy has been threatening my town as well. This time it was Abby who was alarmed. "Who?" "Lord Ashton, but I feel Lord Schuyler will not be far behind," I murmured. "I shall see what I can do. The sun is setting. Dinner will be ready soon," Abby replied. When night fell, and the kingdom had gone to rest, I could not help but mull over what had happened today. Cassidy's information startled me, and Ashton's looming hate struck me even harder. The meadow was in fact going through a renaissance of change. I twiddled my thumbs as I thought about how Sunday tea would go with Queen Venus. The entire nobility would be present, and I had offered to go along with Duke Hudson. That was likely the best time to suck up as much information and gossip as I could. It was unusual on a Saturday night for me to have homework, but our class was studying ancient Egyptian history. I sat at my computer desk, deciding if I should take the time now to research the gods or push it off to tomorrow afternoon. I could accomplish more at the meadow if I did the homework now, so I decided with the click of a mouse. Caitlin Hardy had chosen the name Venus, which was her favorite planet. Likely unknown to her, Venus was also the Roman goddess of love and beauty, the exact opposite of Caitlin. While browsing the Egyptian gods, I came upon Isis. Isis was the ideal mother and wife, a friend to the slaves and the sinners. I laughed a little, considering that Sassy Cassie should adopt the nickname Isis. My eyes opened wide when I read, "Isis is also known as the protector of the dead and goddess of children." I had barely any time to think over the idea of Isis, but she seemed a formidable goddess. The way she was depicted gave me an idea. We arrived at the meadow at high noon. I ran towards Sunset Town, where the Duke was preparing to leave for his tea with the Queen. Benjamin was looking distraught, wearing a macabre black and silver plaid shirt. "It's about time you arrived," the haughty little Duke piped. "Sorry, my lord," I breathed. "My parents wouldn't let us leave before noon." "You'll make me look a fool now, being the last to arrive," Hudson grumbled. I looked over at Ben, who merely shrugged his shoulders. A few of the children in the village had gathered to see us off. The Duke's troop consisted of 3 armed guards, his fake riding horse, which was nothing but one of those toy horse heads on a stick, and a small group of peasants. "Let's be off then," Hudson said sharply. The procession moved slowly with the group of children following behind. When we reached the capital, the city's commoners moved aside for us. We would climb Queen's Summit to reach the plateau where her castle was, but beyond that was a small flat mesa where she enjoyed having her tea. "I should expect you to be quiet when we dine with Her Majesty," Hudson told me as we made our ascent. There were royal guards posted everywhere, carrying a variety of weaponry. When we reached the top, Hudson's name was called out and we strolled towards the gardens. The Queen's castle itself was nothing but an old fort, one that was not usually accessible. The throne was set up below the tree that hosted the fort, shaded by the old wooden boards. The flat area where the Queen dined and spoke with petitioners was a small clearing on top of the hill, shaded by elm and oak trees around the entire perimeter. We were indeed the last to arrive. The rest of the nobility looked their best on this fine Sunday. I joined the other attendants, among them Mark Glass. The new Duke of the Forest looked out of place amongst the Queen's closest advisers, and I couldn't help but observe the company. More guards were posted around the perimeter. This time they were older kids, likely ones in my own grade. Queen Venus had brought iced tea from her house, and her butler was serving it from a large pitcher on a tray. He was a small, timid boy with a fake mustache. His black hair was slicked back. I did not envy that poor child. The attendants and the servants were forbidden to have any of the drink. Instead, we were given small portions of water from a dirty pitcher. "I see your master looks rather unkempt," I said to Mark in a whisper. Tensions were rising in the forest, and Cassidy had told me the new Duke was not favored. "He is dealing with a lot of stress," Mark replied starkly. He was initially heir to the forest, as dictated by Gabrielle Sinclair's will. Instead, he was demoted to the Duke's royal attendant. The children of the forest do not like him. I do not like him. The end is near, dear Jessica. Lady Chloe's attendant, the eloquent Cora Hastings, was giving us a harsh look. "At least be satisfied we are privy to the Queen's tea time," I said under my breath. When Cora strolled away, I pulled Mark closer to the bushes. "We are being watched," Mark said uneasily. "We must act normal," I replied. "Jessica," my master called. I nodded and strolled over to him. He was in the middle of the small field, sipping at his cup in the company of Lord Schuyler and Her Majesty. I bowed deeply. Lady Alice was also near, looking remote. Alice always looked ghoulish to me. Her brown eyes were almost black, and her black murky hair was glossy and straight. It was hard to see the family resemblance between her and Schuyler. "You called, Your Grace?" Hudson smiled. "We were discussing the likelihood of elections in Sunset Town." "Her Majesty does not agree with them any more," Schuyler added. "Did you wish for my opinion, my lords and lady?" I asked nervously. Venus was staring at me. Alice's face was blank. "Hardly," the Queen laughed. She held out her cup and her butler poured more juice. "Your master only wished for you to know of such talk. You may sulk back to the shadows, Miss Walker." Distraught, I curtsied as respectfully as I could before moving back to the servants' area. Cora Hastings was chatting away with Schuyler's groom, Hunter Cooper, unrelated to Lord Kevin Cooper, who stood on the other side of the field. Mark was finishing his cup of water. "What did they want?" he asked. "The Queen is abolishing mayoral elections," I said sharply, crushing my cup. Mark nearly spit up his water. "What? That is insane! How could she hope to do something like that?" I looked over at her vengefully. "She hopes to have all the power in the world, that's why." "A revolution is coming," Mark said quietly. He gripped his water cup tightly, crushing it. "First it will begin in the forest, and then it will spread. Like wildfire, the destruction of our combined forces will roast Queen's Summit until it's nothing but ash." That concludes Chapter 3, our readings for this week. Join me next time when we start Chapter 4, Wildfire. Enjoy the rest of your week. Captures provides the music. Find us online on Facebook by searching The Everglade Chronicles or at Everglade Chronicles on Instagram. I appreciate your support. If you're interested in purchasing any of the Everglade Chronicles novels, you can find them exclusively on Amazon.